But from day to day, if you have that boundary, that might be a difficult boundary for you. Hey guys!
Welcome back
to the You're Not Crazy podcast.
Or maybe you are, but you're in good company.
You are in great company. Okay guys, so we are going to tackle another topic. We're going to try to do this one quickly. We're talking about setting boundaries. What does that look like to set boundaries? Specifically with family members. Excuse me. Lord. Specifically with family members, friendships, relationships. What does it mean to set boundaries? I think because I really want to talk about this heavily, I guess I could just start it off and talk about it. But this topic is very touchy with me. I wouldn't even say touchy. It's very dear to me because it is an area that I struggled in for years. I identify as a recovering people pleaser. Because for years, all my life, I literally, as far as I can remember, I've always been a people pleaser. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I started doing the work to work myself out of that. Because it was extremely toxic and it was wreaking havoc on my life. The reason why the topic was so important was because it was in a therapy session that my therapist looked at me and said, "You've got to learn how to set boundaries." And then she recommended a book for me that I have called Boundaries. That's literally what it's called. It's a very great book. I haven't even finished it yet. The first 2 chapters snatched all of my edges, and I had to let them grow back first before I began to continue to read the book. But I recommend that book for you. Go look it up. It's called Boundaries. I forget the author's names, but we could put it in the description. But why is it important that we set boundaries? How do we set boundaries? And we'll talk about those 2 things, and then we're going to be out of your way. But not me sound like a preacher. I will talk from the perspective of most people who don't have boundaries. I would say are people who lack self-respect. And I know that's hard. That's a hard one. But when you respect yourself enough, you will set those boundaries. And people who struggle with self-respect are people who struggle with self-esteem. And if you don't think highly enough of yourself, you're not going to respect yourself. And you're going to allow other people to run over you. And that's what a boundary is. Something you put up to for a preference that you have. For example, simple example. Anna decides that, "Hey girl, I can do lunch with you today, but I can literally only be with you from 1 to 3. I got to get back to the house." That's a hard boundary she's setting. And the only person that can change that boundary is her. And she would have whatever justifiable reasons. If she says, "Okay, we didn't get started till 1:30 because the waiter took forever to get to the table. Okay, I could push it to 3:30. But that's her. If I say to her, "Well, girl, you'll be all right. Just stay a little bit longer." Now I'm disrespecting your boundary because you've already given me what it is. For me, boundaries I had to set was with friends. I had to let them know, and this is just a mild example, but I have anxiety I have social anxiety, and I just realized that I had it a few years ago. The pandemic really showed me how much, because when it was time, when people started going back out, I was like, wait, no, I don't want to. I was at so much peace, but not. And I began to realize when I would go back to other situations that whenever I was in crowds of people or with people in social atmospheres, I would get anxious. And I'm a people person. I love people, but I get very anxious depending on the situation. And so I had to set boundaries for some of my friends to say, they're like, "Well, let's go do this. Let's go here." And I'm like, "Y'all, I cannot do that. It gives me anxiety." "You'll be all right. We'll be there with you." No, you're not understanding. I cannot do that. It gives me anxiety and I do not want to go. And you have to set a boundary. But guess what? When you're a people pleaser, like I was for so long, I would go to the party with my friend. I would go to the little ratchet club with my friends in college, knowing I didn't want to be there, knowing I was uncomfortable, and I would still go because I didn't want to upset them, or I didn't want them to think that I was being a party pooper. And ultimately, I went and I was miserable the whole time. You know what I'm saying? So at the end of the day, when you do not respect yourself, when you think lowly of yourself and you say, they're not gonna like me if I don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
They're gonna walk away from me. But when you know what you know about yourself, if they walk away, that's their loss.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't want to be my friend no more because I said I didn't want to come with them or said I had to leave at 9 o'clock, they want my friends from the beginning.
Right. Do I want them as a friend?
Do I even want them as a friend? And so it's important that you learn to set boundaries. And I gave very simple, because boundaries can get very deep very quick, and it can be hard. Because when you have to start setting boundaries with your kids, right? What if you have a boundary that says, after 8:30, I'm no longer being mommy. This is my time. That's a hard boundary to set, right? Of course, you can move that boundary when you have to, because if you have a sick child, of course you're going to be mommy at midnight when your child is up with a fever, right? But from day to day, if you have that boundary, that might be a difficult boundary for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you set a boundary with your husband to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with this. When you do this, that makes me very uncomfortable. That may be a hard conversation to have. And I mean, and it can get deep, 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 deep. And I won't go that deep. But I'm just saying it's important that you know where to set those boundaries. And people in your life, if they can't respect those boundaries, you need to reevaluate that. Because at the end of the day, now you have some people that are obsessed with boundaries to the point where they're doing it obsessively just because, just to be like,
just to get things that only go their way, not have to compromise. And
right. And you got to be able to read between the lines with that. You know what I'm saying? Oh, I only go to this place and I'm not budging on that. Or, just outlandish stuff. You know the difference between that and somebody who's genuinely setting a boundary for themselves. If a family says, Cody and I decided Sundays were family days, and the only way that we would pull back from that is if we wanted to, not because we felt like someone was trying to make us. If we said after 5 on Sundays, we weren't going anywhere, we weren't doing anything. It was all family time. And if someone calls and say, hey guys, y'all want to meet us up here at such and such, we make that decision whether we want to pull that boundary back for the day or say, nope, this is family time. Hey, I was wondering if the kids can come and have a play date. No, nope, this is family time for us. This is our time. So that's my take on boundaries. I would want to ask you, how do you go about setting those boundaries?
I feel like I set boundaries too late, or because it takes me a minute to process. Like if something bothers me, I got to process, why did it bother me? Why, or whatever. And so I don't set, which I'm sure most people's boundaries are set off of something that happened or made them uncomfortable. So a lot of my boundaries, if I'm honest, are conversations that I've had with my husband where we've talked about something, and either I'm coming to him with something that I feel uncomfortable about, or he noticed that I was uncomfortable about something, or there was something that happened that he was like, I ain't like that. You know what I mean? Or I don't like you getting home at this time because it's more of a safety thing.
Mm-hmm.
So he's like, babe, I need the cutoff to be at a certain time because I don't want you out at a certain time. Like, I don't feel comfortable with that unless you absolutely have to be. And then 2, because we don't live as close to like a lot of the things that we do, a lot of our friends and family. So that for him, he's like, I prefer you not be getting home at this time because 1, that's unsafe. You have to get out of the car in the dark. You have to get in the car in the dark. Like anything can happen on the road. He just doesn't feel comfortable with it. And then 2, if it's too close to the kids, like if it's after their bedtime and stuff like that, like it just throws off how the dynamic of our home. Not all the time because we've kind of worked around it, but when they were smaller, like there was just certain dynamics that we both agreed on. So it wasn't him like being extra. It was certain dynamic that we both agreed on that we were like, hey, we would like for both of us to be home by a certain time. So that was certain boundaries that we had to set when we would go places. I don't know that I'm really good at it, if I'm honest. I'm learning how to set boundaries. The hardest boundaries I've had to set has been with my family after having children. some of my boundaries were me being just extra and overprotective, but I wanted to be the one to say that I was being extra and overprotective, not change my boundary because someone else felt like I was being extra and overprotective.
Do you communicate the boundaries, or do you allow your actions to show the boundaries?
A mixture.
Or do you do a mixture?
Yeah. I think when I started noticing that, which I know we've talked about this on maybe the second or third episode. I was very protective and very extra when it came to like the kids' schedules and stuff, what they ate, how they ate, all of that kind of stuff. I think my boundary was me just doing it. Because in my mind, I'm like, you see what I'm doing, you see how I do stuff, that's how I expect other things to be done. I was not always the most vocal child when it came to like my feelings or what I disagreed with and stuff like that. So now I'm having to become that now that I have children. And it's hard because now I'm an adult. Like having to find my voice at 30. Like that's not comfortable, you know? And then after having them, I'm having to find my voice through anxiety and depression. Like what so it comes out, either it doesn't come out at all, or it comes out as a breakdown, or it comes out as me lashing out. And so having clear, concise, communicated boundaries is something that I'm having to learn. I'm still having to learn how to do from a healthy place and not from a place of, I don't like using buzzwords. So I feel like some words get just overused because it's cute, but not from like a traumatic place, if that makes sense. I don't like putting up a shield out of me being scared. I would rather put up the shield of protection or boundary out of confidence, if that makes sense. And so that's where I am right now, is trying to, how do I not only set the boundary, but communicate it effectively to where I'm very clear about what my boundary is, but it doesn't come out as me being rude or disrespectful, but it also doesn't come out as me just being not willing to compromise or not willing to explain. Now there's some boundaries that I'm not going to compromise on, especially when it comes to my children. If I say that they cannot drink that, they cannot drink that.
And don't give it to them.
And don't give it to them. And I'm going to be pissed off if you do. And even if my reaction is not pissed off, on the inside, I'm fuming. On the inside, I am taking the cup, I'm taking the lid off, and I'm dousing it in your face like Real Housewives, except it's just going to be juice and not wine. Like that, in my mind, that's what's happening. On the inside, I am fuming because a lot of times people don't understand. They think that it's not a big deal until you're the one that has to be up with them when they have a tummy ache. You're the one that has to be at the dentist with them because now they have cavities. You're the one that has to, they don't see it from that perspective because it don't affect them. They give them a piece of candy and walk on. But they're not thinking about the fact that as the parent, I have to deal with the repercussions of that, not you. And so that's where I'm at, is trying to be confident in my boundaries enough to say, whether you are upset or not, this is what it's going to be. And if I give you a nasty attitude, or if I respond in a way that maybe doesn't make your insides feel nice and fuzzy, it's because you took my boundary and you pushed it to the side as if it didn't mean anything. So that I'm having to find my place in that. And I think some of that has to do that my family, I'm trying to think. You know that whole, like when people would say like, oh, they're nice nasty. My family's not nice nasty, but they just have a way of getting you together. And I'm trying to master the way of getting people together without having to cuss them out and or use curse words. But then the other part of that, because like my dad's side of the family has a very diplomatic way of like getting you together, and pretty much, per my last email type, you know what I mean? They have a very diplomatic way, and then they have a nice other diplomatic way that includes curse words. And the difference is they both sound the same. Same tone, everything. Like it's, one just has sailor words and one of them doesn't. My mom's side of the family is a little bit more spirited. And so I'm having to battle between those two responses because I realize that I don't have a middle ground. I'm either this or so that's where I'm at, because after I've said something, if I have to repeat myself, now
I'm aggravated.
yes, now I'm aggravated and I'm cussing you out. You know what I mean? And I just, I'm trying to be a good example for my children, and so I'm having to find my balance.
A kingdom representative.
A kingdom representative. Look, sometimes I have to think about my children, then think about Jesus, because the other part is Jesus and the Lord will forgive me because they about to get it. But then I'm like, okay, my children, and then Jesus. That I'm not saying that's right. I'm just being very honest. Like sometimes I think about my kids first, and then I'd be like, oh yes, and also
Jesus.
Like, people do recognize my face in church. Like, if I go off,
they can be like, that's that girl.
That's that girl that
be leading worship.
that just prayed on Sunday.
I think too, and we can kind of wrap it up here, but what I was just going to say was, as far as how you go about setting them, that is something I'm still trying to figure it out too. But I will say, I have found that some boundaries can be shown and some have to be said, because you don't want to come off passive aggressive, right? But you also, some stuff just doesn't have, I don't have to tell my friends that we're not doing stuff on Sundays. I just say no. That's the boundary we set within ourselves. Does that make sense? I don't have to tell you that we're not hanging out on Sundays. You don't need to know that. However, if it's a decision that we're making together, then I need to communicate, hey, I can't do events on Saturdays because that's the days that we decided that we're gonna take the kids on a special adventure every Saturday. So I can't do stuff on Saturdays. And then I may say the caveat to that is, if I know well in advance,
then I can.
Then I might be able to do it. But for moving forward, I would like for you not to ask me to be available on Saturdays, because the answer is probably going to be no because of this. That can be communicated. If I set a boundary within myself that says, because you got to make self boundaries too. If I set a boundary within myself that says, I'm not going to eat after 7 p.m., I may communicate that with my husband, because if he's like, hey, let's go on a date, I'm like, we're going to go get something to eat. I'm like, I can't do that. But other than that, I don't have to necessarily tell him that, I'm just not eating after 7. And eventually he'll be like, oh, she doesn't eat after 7, whatever. Or if,
I need to set that boundary right now. I need to.
Listen, or if between the two of us, if I know that, if I say to you, hey, I'm not comfortable when you ask me questions in front of this person, can you, if you need to ask me a question, can you pull me to the side? That's something I need to communicate with you. Instead of passive aggressive says, when you ask me the question, I evade the question. I'm like, or don't say anything. That's passive aggressive. Instead of me just saying, later on, but like, pull you to the side, like, hey sis, like, I'm not comfortable discussing certain stuff in front of her. And since she's in the room all the time when we're working, I just prefer, like, if you don't ask me a deep question like that, just pull me to the side. And now I've communicated that boundary. So when you cross it, now I know that you are not adhering to my boundary. Now, of course, you got to give grace, right? If it's something that you've been doing for a while, you may forget, but, oh, my bad. But that also has to be communicated from the person. So it takes work. Boundaries take work. They take work. But you gotta decipher between the ones that need to be verbally communicated and ones that can just be done, and it makes sense. So
communicate them with the people that it needs to be communicated with.
The people that needs to be communicated with. My husband doesn't need to know the boundary I set with you, because it ain't got nothing to do with him. Now, of course, he probably will know, because pillow talk, right? We talk about everything. But I'm just saying he doesn't need to know
He doesn't
that.
have to know.
My
Yeah.
neighbor across from us doesn't need to know the boundaries we set about what time we coming in the house. They don't need to know that. But they may need to know a boundary if I say, hey, don't come knocking on my door after 10 o'clock because I'm not opening my door.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So it's just, it is what it is. So I know boundaries is a buzzword right now too, just like you were talking about trauma.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a much needed conversation. And some people really genuinely do not know where to start when it comes to boundaries. So hopefully this episode helped you with that. Hopefully. And I'm going to set my boundary now and get on up off of here because I'm sleepy. I'm being kicked in the vagina and in the rib cage simultaneously.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about that time.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the time. And Anna had a boundary about what time she was supposed to be leaving. And we didn't already cross that one. So we're going to go ahead and get on up off of here. In the name of Jesus.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. Love you guys. See y'all in the next video.